You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com. This episode is sponsored by Demand Derivatives, a startup futures exchange and clearinghouse trading the world's major assets in a creative new way. You already trade on an exchange. Here is your chance to own one. Before they approach large strategic partners for funding, the pioneering team at Demand Derivatives launched a crowdfunding portal so that regular traders have the chance to buy shares. Learn more and become a part of this revolutionary fintech project now at demandderivatives.com/crowdfunding. Bitcoin, Ether, Ripple, Litecoin, and more. Cryptocurrencies and other digital assets are taking the financial world by storm. This exploding market provides everything a savvy trader needs: volatility, volume, and liquidity. Provided you know how to find it. That's where we come in. Welcome to the Crypto Rundown. Each week we'll break down the latest trading activity, trends, and developments on everything from coins to tokens, futures, and even OTC options. If it's moving the crypto markets, then you'll find it on the Crypto Rundown. This program is brought to you by Genesis Volatility, also known as GVol, home of institutional-grade crypto options analytics. Whether you're trading CeFi options or DeFi options, cryptocurrencies move. Use GVol Analytics to analyze implied volatility, model realized volatility, structure positions, and unlock alpha. For more information, visit gvol.io. That's GVOL.io. Now it's time to dive into the exploding world of cryptocurrencies and digital assets. It's time for the Crypto Rundown.
All right, everybody. That music means it is time once again for the Crypto Rundown, the program here on the Options Insider Radio Network, where we move beyond the traditional world of SPY and Apple and Tesla, including GameStop. A little bit of that percolating these days as well. Move on over to the other side of the fence. Going to talk a little Bitcoin, some ETH, and everything else smattered in between. My name is Mark Longo from the aforementioned network, as well as, of course, from theoptionsinsider.com. Reminding you, wherever you get this content, Apple, Google Podcasts, our app for the app stores, the old YouTube, Spotify, a million places where this stuff is available. Make sure you keep rating and reviewing. Every month we've seen a huge influx of new listeners to this program and indeed to the network. We want to keep that going. That's, of course, more important than ever in these troubled times. Just in the last week or so has been another exemplar of why that is indeed the case. So keep rating and reviewing wherever you're hearing this program. It really does help new folks discover the show. Keep those questions coming, too. We do love to hear from you guys. And let's see who we're hearing from on the program today. Joining me to break down all the action in the world of crypto, old friend of the program, Mr. John PEARLSTONE from CryptoPatterns.net. John, welcome back to the Crypto Rundown, sir, for the first time here in 2021.
Hello, Mark. Thanks for having me, man.
And it's a boring time to be on the show. I apologize. Not much to talk about this week, sir. We really probably should just end it now. What do you think?
Yeah, I got a lot of trading to do, so it's up to you.
All right, well, let's get to it before he gets pulled away by his trading and dive right on into the Bitcoin breakdown.
It's time to explore the latest trending activity, trends, and developments across the world's leading crypto market. It's time for the Bitcoin Breakdown.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Bitcoin Breakdown, the portion of the program where we break down what's going on in the world's leading digital asset. Just talking about the big dog, Bitcoin. But John, perhaps even before we get to that, I was joking about GameStop earlier, but it is truly inescapable. It is the name that permeates all realms of conversation. I don't care what you're talking about these days. Somehow GameStop interrupts. I have to imagine for a technical guy like you, the whole GameStop frenzy has been just fascinating and probably pretty tempting, sir. What are your thoughts on the whole madness that has unfolded and is continuing to unfold out there in GameStop, sir?
You cannot blame me for sharing as a starting point. It was the largest position we ever had from about $12 a share.
Even though it's called Crypto Patterns, you're loaded up on the other names as well.
I told you it's been a while since I've been on, but I told you the stock market is more volatile and more profitable than the crypto market up until the last couple of months when Bitcoin finally made its move. So, we go where we see the action. And as you mentioned with patterns, there was some very clear patterns going on with GameStop, some really early giant buying going on with big moves that weren't reversing. So we loaded up and it paid off. We're mostly out of it now, just to kind of update you to respond to the question. But, you're just talking about a whole new paradigm going on with something like this. It seems to be affecting everything.
Yeah, it has really changed everything. So what you're saying, the short answer, though, is next time we meet in person, John, dinner's on you is what you're saying.
You got it. I can honestly say a lot of times you talk to these analysts and they make big picks, but they don't own them. We owned it. So absolutely have you. Pick your restaurant. Let's do it.
Yeah, you're right. Because we had talked about it on many of our shows. Even back in September, we had done some joking polls about which you want to pick, GameStop versus Bed Bath & Beyond. But of course, they had an interesting run from $4 all the way up to nearly $20 just by the end of the year. So many people could and indeed were arguing that it was already overvalued to kick off the year. And it was trading 19, 18, 20 bucks around that level. And then, of course, everything subsequently has unfolded, which has taken it into levels that are just beyond the pale that we won't spend more time on this show, listeners, because there's been many shows on our network that we've already touched on it, and we will continue to touch on it. This is going to have ripples and ramifications for the markets for many years to come, I think. We're just seeing the beginnings of what the impact of that was. But still fascinating to see, John, that you guys are out there playing in some of these other heavily shorted names outside of crypto. But speaking of heavily shorted names, let's get to the realm of all things Bitcoin. You might be forgiven by looking at, if you just listen to this show, you might think not much really happened in the week that was Bitcoin from show to show. Last week on our show, Bitcoin was at about 33,700 and change. Coming into today's show is at about 33,800 and change. So up about 100 handles and change on the week. You might think, not a lot really happened show to show. Of course, that belies all the madness that unfolded intra-week, including our friend out there, Mr. Musk. He clearly has decided that he has some ability to swing some underlyings, including GameStop and also Bitcoin. He changed his profile to include just hashtag Bitcoin. That's all it took. And we saw this massive rally back on the 29th, the Bitcoin jumping. It was around 32,000 and change all the way up to north of 38,000 just in a few hours, just on that one effectively meaningless gesture of just changing your Twitter profile a little bit. Of course, it didn't last too long. They faded it and it dropped back below 34,000 by the next day or so. And Bitcoin, of course, still below that level now. But a lot has unfolded in that time since. John, let's start there. It's been a while since you've joined us on the program. We've seen a lot of tumult on the program since your last appearance, including the now infamous run north of 40,000 in Bitcoin and then the retreat back through 40,000, back below 30,000 recently, and back up above it again. So a lot's been going on in the world of technicals out there in crypto. So catch us up. What have these past few months been like, and what has really been lighting up your tape in Bitcoin land as we've seen just enormous moves to the upside and to the downside, John?
Let's go back a little bit. I mean, we were bullish throughout the process, you might recall, and had discounted fairly heavily, standard pattern and technical analysis because they would keep moving it outside of it, a little lower, a little higher. We felt like it was staying close enough in the range. I shared some key numbers with you, like 9,500. And So, we were fully positioned on the move up. We did a special report for our, subscribers and shared that. I can't remember the date. I can look it up if you want, but it was 37,500 has been our target throughout this process. So we missed from 37.5 to 42.5. We, sold our shorter and intermediate term positions. Now it's hovering around that range pretty consistently. And, that's bullish as a net, meaning it hasn't, dropped below 30,000 significantly. And it keeps wanting to retest that 35, 37.5 range. So, it's definitely setting up for another move higher. But whether that'll be a head fake and maybe then you'll see a big reduction or not, I don't know. But we are definitely, increasing our positions on dips at this point.
So you're buying in more as we're dipping. So you're looking for.
Well, right. But remember, we sold a bunch at 37.5. So, it's not like we're not going to double down. We're just using the position.
You're not just hodling. You're not just hodling and hoping for the best out there. Well,
anybody that can do that these days is just way better than we are.
They have an iron.
They
have an iron constitution. That's for sure out there in Bitcoin land. Speaking of Bitcoin, we were just talking about it earlier in somewhat joking fashion, John. But this GameStop impact is being felt everywhere. And we've seen a lot of people, obviously the wave has been looking for the next names that could be the next GameStop, aka heavily shorted stocks and then bidding them up. We're seeing AMC, a bunch of other names like that. Silver has come under the microscope now. It might be the next one folks are trying to pump up. We've seen mixed results from that, but certainly an initial rally in silver out there. A lot of people now are making the analogy to Bitcoin, John, that Bitcoin, of course, heavily shorted, particularly by a lot of institutions. And so if you want to go after the man who's shorting all these names, then perhaps Bitcoin could be the one. Of course, fair bit of overlap, I think it's fair to say, between the Reddit community and the Bitcoin community already. So there's already some overlap existing there. So, John, what are your thoughts about this, that maybe Bitcoin could be the next GameStop, and perhaps that's what's been driving it already?
I'm not seeing it in the futures, which I still think run the show. I think the more likely, and I would share with you because we haven't talked for a while, and I do mention it once in a while, we run our operation as if we're playing against criminals. So I mean, we've been talking about all this stuff with the hedge funds and the games that get played for years, literally. And so to our read on the matter, the more likely direction that the criminals want to take Bitcoin is down. So I'm not sure about the short positions and what the options are telling you and your expertise. But to me, any big move up should be carefully trail stopped because, and I will finish this analysis with the thing I shared with you that you laughed at last time. You said I'd get responses. I did get a few. We view Bitcoin as AOL. We don't think it will be the winner when all the dust settles. And so we are starting to see some differences in returns on various cryptos. We're watching that very carefully to see if something can finally emerge, which has functionality that Bitcoin isn't even close to having. So the real world's starting to catch up with crypto is my point. And I wouldn't expect a big squeeze. I think it would be more of a head fake based on what I'm seeing. Volume for the future seems very bullish in the last month or two.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, people are pointing out some net short positions out there in the futures, but you're right, especially with the options out there, they can always backstop themselves against that. Sometimes I wonder if the folks doing this analysis on the futures are looking at the options. And speaking of the options, let's get into that fun right now. By the way, I can mention all this data we're going to crunch right now, coming at you courtesy of our friends over there at Genesis Volatility. Check them out for yourselves, gvol.io. You're listening to a show like this, you're probably going to like what they have to offer in terms of crypto analytics. They also give them a follow on Twitter. They do some interesting reports out there. We're going to pull some nuggets from that report as well. But come into Showtime. Remember, they break down vol a little bit differently, looking at the hour by hour at the money vol, which is interesting to watch if you're talking Bitcoin, because you never know when a next Musk tweet is going to drive things into the stratosphere. So we have seen some interesting hour by hour volatility. On our last show, we were just a tick under 100, 99 and change in terms of the at the money vol. And coming into today's show, we had about 105. So still very volatile, 105%. compared to most major assets outside of GameStop is absurdly volatile, which, by the way, if you're wondering, GameStop got up to over 1,000 volatility at one point there. So yeah, that's another game entirely. But Bitcoin has been very volatile. And on the day of all the Musk madness, that at the money vol spiked to about 135%. So we did see a massive increase of volatility. By the way, if you're saying to yourself, 105, that's not much volatility. Well, the folks at Genesis crunched the numbers. At the time they did their analysis, the vol was about 110, but it's about the same analysis. One standard deviation at about a 110 or 105 vol equates to about a $2,000 upside or downside move in Bitcoin every day. So a north of triple-digit volatility is extremely high. It's hard to maintain because, as you can see, you need a huge move every day. And it also implies going to be big moves out there. So if you're out there laughing and saying that's not much, 105, 110 vol, it is. And it translates to a lot of volatility. It's also why the folks at Genesis, if you read their analysis, they tend to favor, and I can't argue with this, instead of outright buying vol, because that's very expensive. They instead recommend, of course, to put spreads on that have some sort of short leg as well, so you can benefit from the mad levels of volatility out there. In terms of SKEW, the 30-20 SKEW hourly, that's also had some interesting evolution of late. On our last show, it was nearly 16, about 15 and 3/4. It spiked to nearly 30. Guess when? Yeah, back on January 29th, after Mr. Musk drove everything into the stratosphere. So the SKEW went crazy high, got up to about a 30. Now it's come back down to somewhat more normal, at least compared to last week levels of about 13 and a half. As the Genesis folks put it, the option market participants are reflecting higher upside gamma risk by demanding more vol premium in order to entice call sellers, aka upside calls getting a little bit juicier, a little bit richer. So if you want to sell some upside, there you go. It makes it a little bit more exciting for you out there. In terms of term structure, which is, of course, how the futures are setting up across the expiration months, it's kind of the same as it has been for a while. Pretty much a strong backwardation there in most of the structure. If you don't know what that means, again, check out some of our basic educational content here on the network. We'll explain that in a lot more detail. Options Bootcamp, Options Playbook Radio, good starting points for you if you're confused by any of this. In terms of the open interest, hour by hour, we have seen big swings. Remember, January was kind of leading the board for OI across most of the crypto products we profile here on the show. January now, of course, rolling off the board. So it took a lot of open interest with it. In fact, on our last show, the hourly open interest was at about 220,000 contracts. Right now, it's about 153. So a lot, about 70,000 contracts coming off the board there since our last show. So it's going to take a while to rebuild that in January. It's going to require a few more Musk tweets, I think, to get that number back up to what it was not too long ago out there. People also like to look at things from a notional perspective out there in the crypto world. Again, I'm not the hugest fan, but hey, we'll speak the lingua franca of the crypto world if you want. We were just north of 8 billion in aggregate notional OI across all the venues last show. Again, Jan rolled off the board, took about 2 billion with it. So we're at about 6 billion or so right now, with Deribit, of course, the big dog out there at about a little bit north of 5, about 5.1 billion out there. Then number 2, we've got OKEX, 324 million. Number 3, looks like Bit.com, 282 million. CME has actually fallen off quite a bit, down number 4 at 211 million out there. If you're wondering how this OI shapes up also from a sentiment, from a call versus put perspective, it's pretty close out there right now. So much coming off the board in January. Remember, January had a lot of crazy upside to it, listeners. All that's gone now. 36,000, 52,000, all that's gone. So we're seeing calls and puts closer than they've been in some time. 86,000 calls open versus 70,000 puts open out there right now. So interesting stuff here. Let's go on out to volume as well. What's been active? And you can see on this chart, if you're looking at it, listeners, there's just that one Musk spike, and that's really about it. So on the 29th, you saw big numbers out there. He hit about 1.6 billion worth of notional volume going up on the 29th. Every other day, about a third of that. The highest day was 680 million. Everything else was much less than that. So it was an otherwise quiet week. Musk aside, it really was a pretty quiet week from an overall Bitcoin perspective, especially when you're talking triple-digit vol. You expect this thing to swing a couple of thousand points a day. This is actually a pretty quiet week out there. Let's look at where the monthly OI is, and we'll get into the futures a little bit with John. But in general, I said Jan had about 102,000 contracts open on our last show. All of that is gone now, listeners. So it's a struggle to replace that. We're seeing March start to tick up now with about 49,000 contracts open. That's the clear number one. Then we've got 30,000 or so for February, and everything else is kind of way below. Of course, the weekly Feb, the Feb expiring this week on the 5th, looks like about 23,000 contracts open. So there is a decent amount of paper opening up there in the weeklies. And again, going back to the strikes, all that madness, all that craziness we've been talking about on this show for a while, the Jan 36,000s, the Jan 52,000s. Again, that was all in Jan. 52,000 strike was the number one open strike on our last show. At 21,000 contracts open, and that had gone up 7,000 from the week before. Yeah, all that's gone now. So we have some new, some might say saner, more relevant strikes open. The 20,000 strike, I guess that used to be sane. Now it's kind of deep in the rearview mirror. That's the number one now with about 10,000. Again, the numbers are a pale shadow of what they used to be. And then 40,000 is there number two with about 9,400. And then the 28,000 strike, number three, with about 9,300. Let's get on out to CME land, see what's been lighting it up. Decent paper out there on the futures front, about 24,000 contracts going up in the post-Musk bonanza of Friday. Thursday, 14,000. Wednesday, also 24,000. Tuesday and Monday, both about 13 to 14,000 each. So the futures, John, have been doing some decent paper out there at CME land. I know that's a big key driver for you and your model. So what are your thoughts on some of the paper and some of the price action we've been seeing out there in the futures of late, sir?
I would read this that we're going to see a lot of volatility here. Bottom line, because we have a lot of confidence that we'll be heading back up towards those highs at some point. We may want to take a nice trip down first. And it's just, this seems to support that. Just a lot of aggregation of, different strikes, different areas tells me this thing's going to be moving all over the place at some point. Which, if you think about it, it really didn't on the way up. It was pretty much straight up, like a typical, wave of recognition, as they like to call it in tech land. But now I think the game is up and people want to, get in on the next move. They're going to have to be quite courageous, I think. That's what it tells me.
Yeah, it has been fascinating to watch. The futures still do a robust amount of paper, as I just broke down. The options, for whatever reason, not so much. Saw a pretty decent flurry, nearly 200 going up on Friday. The rest of the week was pretty light from a CME overall Bitcoin options perspective. John, I know you're more of a futures guy than an options guy, but you spend a lot of time watching and keying off of the Bitcoin futures. Are you surprised that there's still this dissonance between fairly decent paper going up on the futures side, and for whatever reason, outside of a few fits and starts here or there, not a ton of paper going up on the options front at CME yet, John?
I would just speculate. There's obviously the drama in the stock market could have something to do with where people are paying attention, but also don't forget that the Ethereum futures are rolling out here. So maybe people are, waiting to see what the impact on the market is there. Maybe that's the setup for the next big move, because I don't have a great read at this, but I feel like we're hovering in a range. I don't think it. I know it. Look at any chart. And, that means there's a lot of uncertainty. So maybe that helps explain it. Futures guys know more than I do. That's for sure. So I tend to follow them.
The ETH futures. What that is the setup for, John, is our next segment. So without further ado, let's keep on rolling into the altcoin universe.
It's time to move beyond Bitcoin and find out what's moving the rest of the crypto marketplace. It's time to boldly venture into the altcoin universe.
All right, everybody. Welcome to the altcoin universe, the portion of the program where we break down everything outside of the big dog Bitcoin, except for right here at the top of the segment where we talk about the top 10. A lot of action going on out here in the altcoin universe. We were talking at the top of the show about the GameStop effect. Well, yeah, it wasn't limited to even Bitcoin or others. Some folks coming for some other altcoin out here. We'll get to that. Number 10, Binance Coin, 7.1 billion out there. Number 9, Bitcoin Cash, 7.6 billion. Number 8, Chainlink, 8.4 billion. Number 7, Litecoin. Oh, how the mighty have fallen, 8.8 billion. Number 6, Cardano, 10.5 billion. Number 5, Polkadot. I love the names out here. 12.9 billion. Number 4, what I was referring to earlier, XRP, aka Ripple, at about 18.2 billion. This one has seen some interesting activity. Going to get to this in a second, but folks, we're coming for this one. in a coordinated short squeeze movement out there, translated into initial pop. Didn't seem like it had the legs to it. It had coming into, as of this analysis here, it was about 39.9 cents. So obviously well north of where it was last week, but not quite at the highs either. But that's good enough for about an 18.2 billion. And number 4 on our list, number 3, Tether, 24.3 billion out there. Interesting. Some say controversial name locked there at number 3 due to its impact on some of the other valuations out there. Number 2, it's ETH, 152.3 billion. Number 1 with a bullet, of course, the big dog, Bitcoin, 614 billion. That number, that 1T number, everyone is talking about. We had our poll recently, which will hit it first, Tesla or Bitcoin. Well, Bitcoin hovering around the 600 billion level right now. Let's get to the number 2 out there in terms of interest, in terms of volume, in terms of market cap, John. It's clearly ETH. Again, this is another one that show to show didn't have a huge swing. We were at about 13.79 on our last show. Coming into today's show, 13.25. So talking about a 50-odd handle swing show to show, but a lot going on in between. John, I know you guys watch ETH out there. What is lighting up your tape out there from an ETH perspective, sir?
We like it. Long term, I don't, but we do. And again, it's more fundamentals that don't really exist in crypto, as you know. But if you're trying to figure out who's going to win the game, I don't particularly see what's going on there. But focusing on technicals, which is what you guys tend to like me to do, we like it, and we think that, again, this whole new paradigm thing. Where's money going to scramble over to? Where are the panics going to show up? If people want into crypto because they're worried about the U.S. dollar, worried about attacks on the capital, whatever they're worried about, they're going into Bitcoin and ETH right now, period. That's what they know. And they're going to have futures. So a lot of new investors are going to have access to it as well. That will also ramp up the manipulation dramatically. So watch for major volatility. But we have told people since the day we started doing this, you want to make sure you have a good position in Bitcoin and ETH if you believe in crypto. So we stand behind that at this point.
Well, of course, as you mentioned, John, the big dog CME is getting into the ETH game. A lot of people have been waiting for them to expand their crypto offerings, and they are doing that. By the time, actually, on our next show, next week, February 8th, that's the launch date for the Ether futures. So finally expanding their offering on the crypto front to 2 over there at CME. But we're seeing some paper, seeing some numbers on the Bitcoin futures front. So, John, I'm curious, you watch the futures quite a bit. What impact, if any, do you think these ETH futures are going to have going forward, sir?
All we are in the end are pattern guys. And the pattern was the futures came out and Bitcoin crashed. So people need to stay aware of that, because that's what happened. You went over 20,000 and then all of a sudden you were at 3,000 over a couple months or whatever it was. So, other than that, it's a huge source of manipulation for the, institutional investors and the sharks and the hedge funds. And it's just definitely be very careful, but it does also increase liquidity. So if crypto stays bullish, it should be very bullish. It's the best answer I can give you at this point. We're watching, we really don't know we don't have a good probability to share with you on it.
Yeah. That was obviously the dreaded impact of launching the futures, because before they did that, Bitcoin was kind of like a roach motel, easy to get in, hard to get out. The Bitcoin futures made getting out more viable, and as a result, we saw Bitcoin take a hit. A lot of people have been speculating and wondering. I mean, ETH not quite at the same level. Bitcoin, the markets have obviously evolved and grown in the last 3 years or so since we've seen those futures launch. It seems hard to believe it's been 3 years, but it has. So the outlets for selling ETH are a little bit more available out there. But now there's still the question out there whether the launch of a future which opens it up to more institutional players on a listed, regulated venue where they could come in and sell this thing, if that will start crushing ETH, or if it will shrug it off. And the markets are very different now than they were 3+ years ago. Let's break it down from a vol and from all sorts of fun perspectives out there. Let's go to the 1 hour vol first. On our last show, ETH vol was at a 148%. So that takes what we're talking about in Bitcoin and puts it in even more stark relief. It has come off a little bit since then. It's down to about 123%. By the way, if you're wondering, that last show level, right around that 140% vol, that translates into a 1 standard deviation move of almost $100 a day, up or down, pretty much. So that's a pretty big swing in an asset that still is only about $1,300. So $100 a day. That shows how much that 140 or even now 123 level translates to from an overall expected movement perspective. Coming in here from a SKEW perspective, again, we saw some interesting movement on a SKEW front. Last show was about 23 3/4. We saw a big spike to 36 on the 29th. Again, once Musk started talking crypto, it seems like that rising tide lifted all boats, and ETH took a bit of a ride with it. And the SKEW moved up to 36. Now it's back down to about where it was last week at about a 25 out there. But the folks at Genesis, they view the ETH SKEW as continuing to be more positive than Bitcoin SKEW. So again, pointing to the fact that ETH, even though it has run up of late, it's still only $1,300 compared to $30,000+ for Bitcoin. So that maybe points to a little bit more potential for upside. And they also point to it as the fact that the ETH futures are coming online this week. They think maybe that's going to be a bullish sign for folks out there. So you can view the launch of the futures in one of two ways, listeners. We'll know for sure on our show next week how these futures have impacted it out there. In terms of volume overall, a fairly light week outside of the Musk day, 227 million worth of notional going up that day. The 25th, 159 million. Everything else was much less, 100 million or less out there, even though the Genesis folks view it as more consistent volume over time than Bitcoin, which tends to have more fits and starts. OI-wise, let's look at how much is open out there from an ETH perspective. And again, a lot of interesting stuff to break down. We're talking serious paper out here. Again, it's a little bit smaller contract, so that puts some of it into stark relief out here. But the OI, 699,000 contracts open on the calls right now and 514,000 open on the put. So even though Jan has come off the board, we've still seen an interesting amount of paper open out there. In fact, last show we were at about 1.2 million. That interest actually percolated up on the Musk frenzy on the 29th, up to about 1.4 million in terms of contracts open hour by hour. And now that's come off again, as even though Jan rolled off the board, it didn't take as much with it as it did out there in Bitcoin. So we're down to about 1.2 million again, which is pretty much exactly where we were a week ago. So we net from an overall OI perspective, not much has changed week on week. We just saw that big blip on the 29th. In terms of where the action is, Jan had 286,000 contracts. So that took those off the board with it. Now March is the big dog, 361,000 contracts open out there. Seems like ETH is embodying that spirit, that ethos of crypto loves a quarterly even more than Bitcoin is these days, as we saw a lot of paper going up in Jan, but a lot of paper has been fixated on March for some time in ETH, and that continues to be the case. Number two is Feb with a little over 200, looks like about 225,000 contracts open there. Then we got to June, again, the quarterlies with a little bit north of 200,000 open as well. So it's March, the big dog. Then Feb and June are pretty close to neck and neck for number two over there. He's talking about strikes, where the action is. We've seen it for a while. The strikes in ETH are just weird in terms of where things are open. They continue to be, even though Jan rolled off the board. It's still the 400 strike. So 900 plus handles in the rearview mirror right now is still the number one position out there with 87,000. It continues to grow as well, which is kind of fascinating. It's kind of the polar opposite of Bitcoin, where we saw enormous positions far, far out of the money and soon became in the money. This time they're beefy in the money positions that have been for some time. The 480 strike, number two, with about 75,000 contracts open. And then the 320 strike, number three, with about 70,000 contracts open. So yeah, you have to go pretty far down to find anything that's even remotely close to the 1,300 level. And you're talking less than 50,000 contracts, about 40-odd thousand contracts. So interesting stuff lining up out there. John, we just talked about ETH. A lot of other altcoin have been lighting it up this week, including XRP. Have you guys been paying attention to any of those over there at Crypto Patterns this week, sir?
Very much so. I think that's our secret sauce, honestly, is we really try to watch the correlations to the large, if you want to call them large altcoins relative to Bitcoin, the medium, moderate, and then the small altcoins. And we're looking for those divergences. We're looking for something to, be significantly different than the market and staying there. And you're probably aware, you may have even had other shows on it about DeFi. There's several of those have entered the top 20. They seem to, have some presence. And this XRP thing, and it's kind of my theme for your listeners today, is just, manipulation is always in this market, but it's rampant right now. I mean, it's rampant. You got DOGECOin in the top 10 at one point, and now Ripple. I mean, you can't bank on much of anything right now. So you'd want to look at projects that you really believe have some staying power if you plan to hold anything. Otherwise, you're just in it for a short-term trade.
Well, speaking of short-term XRP and the attempted short squeeze, pump and dump, call it what you will, it was very short-lived out there as well. We saw some rooms starting to pop up. They tried it on Reddit. They tried it on a few other areas like Telegram as well, trying to drive up XRP in this concerted effort. And it did work for a while. Remember, we talked about XRP. It was on the 20-cent level not too long ago. Then it rallied up. People thought it was looking good. Then, of course, it got annihilated with all the SEC investigations into XRP back down to about the 20-odd cent level. Kind of been languishing there for a while. But this short squeeze attempt did drive it up to about 75 cents. So you're talking over 3x. So from a pure percentage perspective, it seemed like it was working. And then something came in that just clipped it at the 75 cent level. Maybe it was some of these institutions who've been burned before. Remember the infamous spike up to $3 and back down, or it hit 60. I think it also hit 60 cents not too long ago as well. So it has had a few fits and starts, and people have been burned by not selling it in the past because it seems like someone clearly learned their lesson this time because they unloaded some at the 75 cent level and drove it back down to shy of 40 cents. Coming into Showtime, XRP was at, about 38.8 cents there. So again, well shy of the 40 cent level. And now it's a question. It's kind of in the middle of that range now. Who's going to win? Are these short squeezers going to drive it back up again? Are the liquidators going to come in and drive it back down? Either way, XRP is moving all over the place. As John mentioned, there's manipulation all over the place. And manipulation doesn't have to just be, someone behind the scenes laughing maniacally as they're moving prices. Manipulation, if everyone's getting together to drive a stock up, that's kind of the textbook definition of manipulation. And XRP certainly being manipulated right now. So again, as John mentioned, be careful out there. If you're diving in, kind of hard to be a hodler. Of course, it is only 42 cents. So as long as you make sure that all the money you put in there, as long as it's not the kid's college fund, goes in XRP, make sure you're comfortable with it going away, potentially, because there is still some looming and lingering questions from the SEC on that one. But it has been fascinating to watch. I was kind of wondering when they were going to come for XRP, and it sounds like it was over the course of the past week. It just price level, everything else wise, it just seemed to line up for being one of the next names people wanted to squeeze out there. Bitcoin Cash took a little bit of a hit over the past week, down about $42, almost $43. And Bitcoin SV, kind of a quiet week, only down about $3. All right, let's go on out now to answer some of your crypto questions.
You've got questions about crypto. Who doesn't? It's time to find out the answers to your crypto questions.
All right, everybody, welcome to your crypto questions, the portion of the show where we answer your questions. And as you might imagine, you guys have a lot of them these days. We'll see if we can squeeze in a few. We were talking on our last show, and we had Simon on talking about his new Level Up ETF coming soon out there in crypto land. We talked, a lot of you guys have been sending in for the last couple of weeks comments on this DOGECOIN. You guys are all obsessed with it. So we had a listener question. Let's see. Christian coming in this week says, wonder if all those people talking up Doge on your last show are regretting that now. We also have somebody listening live here. What is this? JShip78 saying, he just writes in with Doge. And what we're talking about is Bitcoin the next GameStop. He throws in Doge to that conversation. So this has been a fascinating one. If you're curious, Doge right now, listeners, at 0.037 out there, as after coming off its highs of 0.077 just a few sessions ago, back on the 28th. So on the madness, the 28th, 29th, all that Musk-related, Musk-driven frenzy of crypto, Doge hit its highs recently of nearly 0.08, not quite there, 0.077, and then it took it on the chin back down to about 0.02. It's actually up a little bit from there now, up to 0.036, 0.037 and change out there. So it's been a fascinating, wild ride for a currency that was started as a joke based on an internet meme. But it has been fascinating to watch. John, you just mentioned Doge earlier, so I'm curious. Sounds like you've been watching this saga. What are your thoughts on this internet meme turned internet currency turned short squeezer?
I wouldn't discount it the way many people do. It's been a significant trading vehicle for the crypto market for years, not just recently, even though now people are becoming more aware of this. If you're interested in trading, that spikes routinely. And, I can't tell you where it's going, and I wouldn't be putting a big percentage of my assets in it. But until crypto becomes mainstream, until the regulations are all crystal clear, it wouldn't shock me at all to see that go to 10, 25 cents, back to a penny. It's just, the criminals use it when they feel like using it. And I don't think that's over by any means.
The criminals. Yes. Certainly a few of those floating around out there. We also, like I mentioned earlier in the show, we had a poll we did not too long ago about which of these names, if either, you think will hit 1 trillion market cap first, Tesla or Bitcoin. As I mentioned, our audience, you guys flocked into this one, and our audience came in choosing Tesla ever so slightly. There was a lot of back and forth. Tesla, Bitcoin, they were both hovering on 50% for the longest time. Tesla ended up eking it out with about 57.6%. Bitcoin coming in at 42.4%. We had another person commenting on that poll, even though it ended a couple of weeks ago, still chiming in on that one. Bob T saying he's Bitcoin for life. So there you go, Bob T. I get you. You're a hodler, sounds like. Sounds like you voted for Bitcoin in our poll. It's an open question. Will either of them hit it? Bitcoin at about 600 billion. At the time we did that poll, Tesla's at about 730 billion. I'm sure it's probably higher now, but still fascinating stuff to break down. Another question here from Mr. Kit, maybe Market. Let's go with Market. I like it better. He says, "Okay, crypto dudes." Well, hello, Market. Do you think the short squeeze phenomenon will make its way to crypto soon? Well, yeah, listen to the whole show we just did there, Mr. Kit or Market. It pretty much already has XRP, Doge. Some will argue Bitcoin. I think the question going forward now, John, is where do we stand in these waves of potential short squeezes? Have they exhausted themselves? Is this phenomenon coming to an end? Are they going to continue doing this in other names? What do you think going forward, John, in terms of these ever rippling waves of short squeeze? You think this is going to start tamping down, or you think this is just a pause before the next storm, sir?
Very quickly, I'll try to share this. There's a guy on Reddit who was probably the starter of the whole GameStop phenomenon. And, he put a $50,000 investment in there that's now, last I checked, worth about $35 million. And he based his investment on fundamentals and the fact it was so negatively perceived by the entire marketplace, like, counterintuitive. He said what I believe, which is if a short squeeze happens and it's consistent with the reason I bought it, it'll help it go up. But I'm not going to invest in the hopes of a short squeeze happening because it's just very hard to speculate on that. And I think it's a lot harder to pull something like that off in crypto with the lack of liquidity. It's hard to know exactly what short positions even are, how to get short. I'm not a big believer. I would buy what I believe in, and if that happens to have a big short position, then you're lined up for something great if it happens. But searching for it, I think, would not be a good investment thesis.
That's a good point about the lack of investment vehicles. You could short things a lot more readily in stocks. Some might argue too readily, given the nearly 150% short interest out there in GameStop. That's a conversation for the regulators, not for this show, but a little bit more difficult to source that short liquidity and even line it up venue to venue in the crypto world. So maybe a little bit harder to pull those off there. Who asked that? Christian over there. So yeah, interesting stuff. I don't think we've heard the last of this phenomenon, not by a long shot. Like I said, we were just talking earlier about folks already coming for silver and trying that out in silver. We saw it in XRP. It's just a matter of time. And most of these cryptos are trading at, a few dollars, if not fractions of dollars. So from a cost and outlay perspective, they certainly are a much easier thing to try to throw some capital to than a GameStop that's trading around $300+ right now, or even an AMC that's at 17 or something like that right now. So yeah, it's fascinating to see this unfold. I've been doing this for a long time. I've never really seen anything like this. This is certainly something where the ramifications are going to be felt for a long time to come. And we've, I think, only just scratched the surface in terms of what the regulators are going to do, how the markets are going to react. There's a lot coming. Like we saw a massive wave of regulation and changes to the infrastructure after, the 07, 08 meltdown. I think we're going to see something similar going forward after this whole GameStop thing. In the hindsight, they're going to see regulators stepping in, we're going to see brokers and a bunch of others. The industry as a whole stepping up and trying to make this. Clearly, the messaging was terrible last week as well. People had no idea what was going on, which just led to these rampant conspiracy theories getting out there, which is never good for anyone. So a lot to unpack. That's for another show, not for the crypto rundown. But great questions, everybody. Great to see so many of you joining us week after week. This show is kind of literally the only game in town. So if you want to talk about crypto derivatives and volatility and volume and OI, all that good stuff, SKEW, you know where to find us. The Crypto Rundown every Monday here on the old network. Just subscribe to the full network. You'll get this show and everything else that we do, about a dozen shows, usually a couple of shows hitting you a day over there. So you'll be happy. You'll be fed well with options content. But before we go, John, if they want more content from you guys, maybe on the crypto front, where should they go? What should they do, sir?
Hit us up at cryptopatterns.net. And as I said, we've got the special report that still has some value because it projected some future things we're watching. You can get that if you like. And we're available for questions and subscriptions and, data for institutions and bigger investors. That's been most of our work lately, actually. So just go over to cryptopatterns.net. Let us know you're interested.
Once it rallied north of 40, did you see a big influx in institutions knocking on your door?
Honestly, we had a few from when it was on the downside. They were like, should we be getting into this? That's kind of how we reach people because they little FOMO. I guess that's why, fear of missing out. And we're hoping we get more of that. We're not the most well-known game in town out there. But as I said, we have you haven't asked me yet, and I don't know if you're going to, but I was going to give you some of my picks. And, we have had one of the better last 12 months of any outfit we know in terms of making the right calls in the right times, where to hold and what to buy. And so, we feel real comfortable if people want to get involved.
Sure. We're wrapping up. If you want to hit us with a couple of picks before we go, have at it, sir.
All right. Excellent. We like the silver trade. You mentioned it, and I like the story. I like the fundamentals. I like the chart. So we're not throwing all our weight in it. But if you want to talk about a short squeeze, that even though it's very difficult, it's been tried before, that makes me even more attracted to it. So we're watching that one pretty close. In the crypto world, the two that worked out really well, we got involved, and anybody who wants to get their feet wet in altcoins, DOT, Polkadot. When they first came out, they were offering a 12% staking yield and still do over at Kraken, which is a very good exchange for U.S. investors. And we like the story. It's an Ethereum developer. They're further along in terms of their scaling than Ethereum already. They have some DeFi connections. We think it's really good. Below $14, you might pull some out. But right now it's trading, I want to say it was just at $15.99.5. That's exactly what it is. And then the other one, if you're more of a speculator, really a big fan of Engine Coin, ENJ. It doesn't trade on many exchanges, which is bullish, by the way, because we think it will. ENJ is focused on video games. And we had been in it way back when, not a huge position, but it's essentially doubled. And we didn't take any off on that. We added, they got approved to work directly. Well, they got approved by the Japanese government. And I'd be lying to say we understand all this stuff. But if they can get past regulators in Japan, which is video game home base, we believe that's one of the better use cases we've ever heard in crypto. So we're believers. We're going to accumulate that over time, too. We already have a decent position.
There you go, listeners. Ending the show with some picks. If you want more, hit them up over there at cryptopatterns.net. On behalf of John, everybody over there at Crypto Patterns, and everybody over there at Genesis Vol, check them out, gvol.io, the easy way to find it. And indeed myself. I thank all of you out there for downloading, streaming, subscribing, for listening live, for sending in your questions and your comments. We'd love to hear from you folks. And we'll see you back here next week, another episode of the Crypto Rundown.
This program is brought to you by Genesis Volatility, also known as GVol, home of institutional-grade crypto options analytics. Whether you're trading CeFi options or DeFi options, cryptocurrencies move. Use GVol Analytics to analyze implied volatility, model realized volatility, structure positions, and unlock alpha. For more information, visit gvol.io. That's GVOL.io. This episode is sponsored by Demand Derivatives, a startup futures exchange and clearinghouse trading the world's major assets in a creative new way. You already trade on an exchange. Here is your chance to own one. Before they approach large strategic partners for funding, the pioneering team at Demand Derivatives launched a crowdfunding portal so that regular traders have the chance to buy shares. Learn more and become a part of this revolutionary fintech project now at demandderivatives.com/crowdfunding. You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions@theoptionsinsider.com.